Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mathematical Mixing. I'm your host, Mrs. Jackson, and today we will be making integer soup. Before we create any soup, we need to know what the ingredients are. If a recipe calls for bok choy, we better know what bok choy is. So let's take a look at what an integer is. Integers include all the whole numbers and their negatives, and also 0. So negative 2 is in there, and 2. But if we do a fractional part of 2, say 2.5, that is not an integer. Any fractional parts don't count. So like 7 1/3, also not an integer, does not belong to the integer club. Now, what about my favorite number, pi? Pi is a little bit more than 3, 3.14159, and continuing on and on and on. And unfortunately, beautiful pi, not an integer either. So it's not that negative numbers can't exist in fractional form, it's just that they're not integers. We're going to use integer soup to model mathematical operations. I know you're thinking this is not some live surgery show that you signed on for. When I talk about operations, I'm not talking about the medical kind. I'm talking about mathematical operations. So no worries if you faint at the sight of blood. Using operations means you're applying a mathematical process, such as adding things together, subtracting things, taking them away, multiplying, dividing, taking the absolute value, square rooting something, or even taking a number to a power. Today we're only going to be talking about integers in terms of adding and subtracting, and in a later video, multiplying and dividing. The red cubes represent hot cubes. They raise the temperature of our soup by 1 degree. The blue cubes represent cold cubes. They lower our temperature by 1 degree. For this activity, you're going to need 10 red items. I'm using cubes. You can use cubes, or marbles, or Legos, or crayons, or cut up little pieces of paper. But you need to have 10 and label them as red or color them red. You also will need 10 blue items. Crayons, Legos, marbles, bouncy balls, whatever you have 10 of that are also blue. You're going to need a mixing bowl. This mixing bowl is to hold your cubes. You can use anything. You can use a bowl, a container, just something to hold your cubes. If you would like to even use the table, go ahead, use the table. This kind of soup doesn't spill all over the place. See? Okay, so let's look at our model. Our model, first of all, let's just try the hot cubes, the hot soup cubes. And I'm going to go ahead and put 5 hot cubes into my soup. So now I have 5 hot cubes. I can mix it up. The temperature of my soup only has hot cubes. The temperature of this soup is 5 degrees. Now I can also make some cold soup or bisque. So I could take 3 of these cubes, the blue cubes, and put them in here. The temperature of my soup, -3 degrees. Now let's look at a few examples where we have both hot and cold cubes. Now if we just look at this soup, we can see that there's definitely more cold cubes than hot cubes. So we know the temperature is going to be negative. Now, in order to find the temperature of this soup, we can actually match up 1 hot cube for 1 cold cube because they cancel each other out. Now if we look at our soup, we find we have 4 hot and cold matches with 5 cold cubes left over. So the temperature of this soup would be -5 degrees. It's time to dig into some operations.